My name is Daniel Hart, and the moment that changed my life happened because I forgot my phone charger. It sounds ridiculous now, but if I had remembered that charger, I would have gone straight home that night like every other employee in the building. I wouldn't have gone back to the office. I wouldn't have walked past the conference room, and I definitely wouldn't have overheard the conversation that exposed the real reason my boss hired me. At the time, I thought I had finally caught a break. 6 months earlier, I had been laid off from a small tech firm that collapsed almost overnight. No warning, no transition period, just a meeting where HR handed out envelopes and security badges stopped working by the end of the day. Finding another job wasn't easy. For 3 months, I sent applications to dozens of companies and barely received responses. Interviews came and went with the same polite rejection emails. Then one afternoon, I received a call from a company called Stratton Dynamics. The salary was better than anything I had been offered before. The position was operations analyst, a role that sounded important enough to feel like progress. And the person interviewing me was the CEO himself. His name was Victor Stratton. When I first met him, he had the kind of presence that made people sit up a little straighter without realizing it. Calm voice, steady eye contact, the confidence of someone who had built something successful from nothing. He shook my hand and smiled. "I've looked over your resume, Daniel," he said. "You've had a rough few months." I nodded. "That's one way to put it. I like hearing people who have had setbacks," he continued. "Why?" "Because they understand risk." At the time, that answer sounded thoughtful. Now I know it meant something very different. The interview lasted almost an hour. Most of the questions were about how I handled pressure, deadlines, and uncertainty. At the end of the conversation, Victor leaned back in his chair and said something I still remember word for word. "You're exactly the kind of person we need here." 2 days later, I had the job. For the first few months, everything seemed normal. The office was modern and fast-paced. The team worked long hours, but the projects were interesting and the paychecks arrived exactly on time. Victor himself rarely appeared on the main floor, but when he did, people paid attention. He walked through departments asking quick questions and offering brief encouragement. "Good work here. Keep pushing that timeline. You're doing well." I assumed that meant the company was healthy. Looking back now, I realized there were signs that something wasn't right. Invoices that disappeared from the accounting system. Projects that started and stopped without explanation. And occasional meetings behind closed doors where only Victor and 2 senior executives were present. But I was new, and when you're new, you don't question things too much. You focus on doing your job well enough to keep it. 6 months passed. Then one Thursday evening, everything shifted. That day had been unusually busy. Our team stayed late finalizing a report for an upcoming investor presentation. By the time I finally left the building, it was almost 9 o'clock. Halfway to my car, I realized my phone battery was almost dead. My charger was still at my desk. Normally, I would have ignored it and dealt with it the next day. But I had plans to meet a friend later that night, and I didn't want my phone dying on the way there. So I turned around and went back inside. The office was mostly empty. A few cleaning staff moved quietly between cubicles while the overhead lights dimmed in unused sections of the floor. My desk sat near the back hallway that connected to the executive conference room. As I grabbed the charger from my drawer, I heard voices down the hallway. Victor's voice. And someone else. I wouldn't have paid attention if the door had been closed, but the conference room door was slightly open, and the conversation inside sounded tense. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. But then Victor said something that made me stop walking. "The documents are already signed," he said calmly. The other man sounded nervous. "You promised this wouldn't come back to us." "It won't. And the employees. They won't know anything until the deal is finished." My heart skipped. I took one small step closer to the doorway. "You're selling the company?" the man asked. Victor chuckled softly. "Selling? No." "Then what?" "I'm transferring the assets." "To who?" Victor's answer came after a pause. "To myself." I froze. The other man sounded confused. "How does that help?" "It leaves the liabilities behind." "You mean the debt?" "And the lawsuits." Silence filled the room. Then the man spoke again, his voice lower now. "That would bankrupt the company." "Yes." "And the employees. They'll be laid off." My chest tightened. "But you just hired dozens of new analysts." "That was necessary." "For what?" Victor's voice dropped into something colder. "To keep the numbers stable until the transfer was complete." My mind started racing. If what he was saying was true, the entire company was about to collapse. And we had all been hired to make the collapse look normal. The man inside the room exhaled slowly. "That's ruthless." Victor laughed quietly. "That's business." I stood there in the hallway, realizing something terrifying. Victor Stratton hadn't hired me because I was talented. He had hired me because I was expendable. And in that moment, I understood the real reason I had been chosen. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. My first instinct was to walk away quietly, pretend I hadn't heard anything, and leave the building like every other night. But once you hear something like that, pretending becomes impossible. The words stayed in my head, repeating themselves in a loop. Transfer the assets. Leave the liabilities behind. Everyone gets laid off. Inside the conference room, the conversation continued. "You're sure the board won't block it?" the other man asked. "They can't," Victor replied. "The paperwork was structured months ago." "And the investors?" "They'll think the market shifted." The man sighed. "And the employees?" Victor didn't hesitate. "They'll get severance packages and polite emails." I felt my hands tighten around the phone charger. 6 months of late nights, projects, and meetings suddenly looked very different. We weren't building anything. We were stabilizing something that was about to collapse. I backed away slowly from the hallway, careful not to make noise, and walked back toward my desk. My heart was beating faster than it should have been, and I kept replaying the conversation in my head, trying to convince myself I had misunderstood. But the words had been too clear, too precise. Victor Stratt was planning to dismantle his own company. And everyone working there, including me, was simply part of the transition. When I reached the elevator, I stopped. A strange thought crossed my mind. If Victor was transferring the assets to himself, that meant documentation existed somewhere. Contracts, financial records, emails, proof. And if proof existed, someone could expose what he was doing. The elevator doors opened. I didn't step inside. Instead, I turned around and walked back toward my desk. I told myself I was being paranoid. But another part of me knew something important. Victor Stratton had built his reputation on being careful. He wouldn't leave obvious evidence lying around. Unless he believed no one was looking. I opened my computer again. Most of the office systems required high-level authorization, but analysts like me still had access to financial projections and operational files. If Victor's plan involved transferring assets, the preparation would appear somewhere in the records. I started searching through project folders, quarterly reports, asset inventories, transaction projections. At first, everything looked normal. But then I noticed something strange. 2 identical documents with slightly different dates, both labeled strategic resource allocation. The older file showed the company's assets listed under Stratton Dynamics. The newer one showed the same assets moved to a different entity, Stratton Holdings LLC. My stomach tightened. Stratton Holdings wasn't a partner company. It was Victor's private investment firm. I opened the document and scrolled through the details. Equipment transfers, patent ownership, property leases. Every valuable asset the company owned was scheduled to be reassigned within 30 days, leaving only debt behind. Exactly like Victor had described. For a moment, I just stared at the screen. Then another realization hit me. If the assets were transferred to Stratton Holdings, the employees wouldn't move with them. We weren't assets. We were expenses. Expenses that would disappear the moment the company declared bankruptcy. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled slowly. This wasn't just a bad business decision. It was a deliberate setup. Victor had hired new staff to maintain the illusion of stability long enough for the transfer to finish. By the time anyone realized what happened, the company would already be empty. And Victor would own everything valuable without the debt. My phone buzzed in my hand. A message from a coworker asking about tomorrow's meeting agenda. I stared at the message. He had no idea what was about to happen. None of us did. I closed the document and looked around the quiet office. Rows of desks. Monitors still glowing with unfinished work. People who believed they were building something meaningful. Suddenly, the entire building felt like a stage, set after the audience had gone home. I needed to think. If I ignored what I heard, nothing changed. Victor's plan would work exactly the way he intended. But if I said something, I would be accusing the CEO of fraud. And people who accuse powerful executives rarely keep their jobs. I rubbed my forehead and stood up. Outside the windows, the city lights stretched across the skyline. Thousands of people working late, living their lives, assuming the systems around them were honest. Inside this building, I had just discovered they were. I walked toward the elevator again. This time I stepped inside. As the doors closed, another thought formed. Victor Stratton believed no one would question the deal. He believed the employees were too busy to notice. He believed the transfer would happen quietly. But he didn't know one thing. Someone had overheard the plan. And that someone now understood exactly what he was trying to do.